Today on the Modern Motherhood Podcast from AllMomDoes, I'm your host, Julie Lyles Carr. And we have a guest on today. I just see more and more in my interactions with people and trying to love people well. He helps guide such a needed and valuable resource today. You know, we've all got all kinds of hurts and habits, hangups that we're dealing with, and we need community to help carry us through. Today, we're talking to Jeffrey Grassman. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate having me, Julie.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I am the father of two stepchildren, Kelsey and Cody. They're 26 and 24. I'm married to Christy, and we have a 5-year-old daughter together, and her name is Kaylin. We live here in Sumner, Washington, and we're blessed to be on staff at our church, Calvary Community. We are the Celebrate Recovery directors, so I'm fortunate to be part of a ministry that has just been instrumental in our church for, if the church is the hospital, Celebrate Recovery is definitely the place people land in the emergency room.
Wow, that's a big jump in terms of kids' ages. I bet you have a lot of things you could tell us about being a father to both those in their, adult years and in a 5-year-old. But on this with Celebrate Recovery and serving in your church, how did your work and focus for this ministry begin for dealing with those who, as Celebrate Recovery says, who have hurts, habits, and hangups?
Yeah, so I am personally in recovery myself. I am celebrating 16 years of sobriety from alcohol and drugs, and that's how I was introduced into Celebrate Recovery. I went through the normal 12-step route in the beginning, and then it was about 7 years into my recovery. Our church had launched Celebrate Recovery, which is a Christ-centered 12-step program. And obviously, as a believer in the Lord, it was attracted to me to start attending. And then God just worked out the details as far as leading and serving and eventually coming on staff with our church in Celebrate Recovery.
I think it's so helpful to know when someone has been walking the path themselves, who is currently staying in the lane, that they have those experiences rather than it sort of just being an academic experience. Someone who's really gone through what it's like to try to break through and to deal with some of these kinds of things. Now, I have several people in my world, and one in particular, who are going through recovery processes, but I've got one person who is trying to white knuckle it alone, without AA, without Celebrate Recovery, any of those things. So what are your thoughts on someone who is trying to overcome this kind of challenge, but isn't doing it within the context of something that is consistent and isn't doing it within the context of community?
Yeah, it's the analogies are many, and we always want to look at maybe the person that we're trying to address, but a general way of looking at it for me is Celebrate Recovery represents what we call the recovery model, and then there's something that the white knuckle brings, which is the sobriety. And so sobriety is interesting because it's almost impossible to have recovery without sobriety. It kind of makes sense, but it is possible for people to try or experience sobriety without recovery. So if you can put it on, if you had pneumonia and you were very, very, very ill, you could try to white knuckle it without any help. You could try to put yourself in a position to where, let's say you didn't have internet access, no access to books, nothing to help you, just on your own kind of resources, what you think, feel, or want to do. This should logically work out. And then statistically speaking, I don't know where you would fall as far as your outcome. I don't know if you'd be well. I don't know if it would just pass. I don't know if maybe something tragic would happen. So that's kind of the best analogy in my own life. I would want to surround myself with the right doctors that prescribe correct medication, maybe hospital care or nurses. And so that's what recovery brings, is those products. And so it's kind of, if you went to a room full of people that had never experienced having pneumonia or near-death illness like that, I don't know how much value they could bring to you as far as believability. But if you went in a room full of recovered people or people that have walked through a journey of sickness, you potentially would maybe believe them over somebody else.
Jeff, I love that distinction between sobriety and recovery, because I do see in my world people who they feel like if they can just avoid whatever that temptation has been, whether it has been chemical, alcohol, pornography, different, behaviors, if they can just avoid committing the behavior, then that means they're well. And yet the things that led to the behavior and the triggers that led to the behavior don't really get dealt with. I think that's a really powerful distinction between sobriety and recovery. You know, one thing I'm seeing a lot in the women's ministry space that has gotten very interesting, I'm seeing a lot of normalizing of drinking. I see a lot of memes and merchandise and T-shirts and all kinds of things extolling the idea of wine o'clock, you know, for the frazzled mom. And I don't want to go back into a period of time that's super legalistic or judgmental, but do these kind of trends concern you when we're normalizing certain behaviors as coping mechanisms? And how do we speak about our concerns without sounding judgmental, without going down that lane?
Yeah, I think being grace-filled is something that everybody struggles with as a believer from time to time. And we don't want to be judgmental. We don't want to start going down a road where whatever you're doing isn't right. We always want to look at somebody's outward actions as what's a way for me to look at my own. I want to take a picture and say, hey, what am I doing? I think those are the times we need to step into a role of my personal choices, or as Pastor James McDonald would say, is it a liberty or is it something you have to have? And we want to be careful with our liberties. Our liberties are something that we intellectually can look at or society deems appropriate, like marijuana is legal and pornography is legal and alcohol is legal. So we're not going to categorize them all three. Sanctification-wise, are these going to be tools that are going to help me get there? And, you could speed in your car for minutes and, hours and days and never get in a car accident. But does that mean that is that healthy for you? So those are some simple analogies. But I'm not here to tell somebody they can or can't drink by any stretch of the means.
So, one of the tagline that we know Celebrate Recovery for, this idea of helping people with their hurts, habits, and hangups, one of the things I want to be cautious about is we're not only talking about, say, a chemical or drug or alcohol addiction. There are lots of other things that people need recovery from. So give us kind of the scope of what Celebrate Recovery is wanting to address in a way that's broader than what people may understand.
Yeah, that's great. The first statistic I want to share is that less than a third of the people that attend Celebrate Recovery actually struggle with drugs and alcohol. So that's less than a third. So if you had a Celebrate Recovery of 100 participants on a large group night, 33 of them potentially will struggle with drugs and alcohol. The other 66 are not. And so when we look at that, like, why would somebody else come to Celebrate Recovery? Well, let's look at the addict model. For every alcoholic or addict in the home, addicts love to marry people that enable or codependent or something like that. So the spouse continually is on the alert to make excuses because they weren't there for Jimmy's baseball game, or they didn't show up for the recital, or he missed work again. And then that behavior of the addict, kind of overrunning that or manipulating that puts them in a codependent way where their identity becomes in somebody other than themselves and Christ. And so codependents actually make up a large amount of Celebrate Recovery. So that's kind of the stereotype. The other thing is a huge growing population of the prodigals. So us that have adult kids, sometimes having adult kids, they tend to make really good choices. But if they go down this road, we, just like in the story of the prodigal son, we start to grieve. We start to actually are at loss. Like, how could this happen? We brought him up in a Christian home. And so these parents of adult kids that are going in a different direction, they're coming too. And it's a big deal to have community around that. So how to learn, healthy boundaries, how to put ourselves in positions to where we're not hurting the addict, but, we're still being good parents. And then we have other things too, like we have food addiction groups. We have a very popular one at ours is love and relationship addiction. It's a women's group right now. And it doesn't mean people that are, doing things physically. It really is that attraction to having to always be in a relationship all the time. And so those are just some things. The newest one we just started was one for people that are struggling with forms of depression and or anxiety. It's not a fix-it group. It's a place where people that are really just their mental health situation has put them in a crippling, they can't even function, much like somebody that was struggling with something else, and it's a way for them to be supported and loved. So that's kind of the generic, I think, way of looking at it. We look at it as it celebrates sanctification. That's really what we're doing, is we're being sanctified every day. Whatever barrier or hurt, habit, and hang up is in kind of stopping you from growing in Christ. That's what Celebrate Recovery represents.
I love that expanded definition, because we do tend, I think, to look more toward, it's an addiction thing. If you have an addiction and I don't, and so I'm not, that's not for me. But it really is much bigger than that. It is those things that we are finding ourselves challenged to try to break through to get to the places that we want to be in our relationship with God. So if someone, and you began to speak to this, we hear a lot about enabling family dynamics, codependent family dynamics. If we're part of a partnership in parenting and one of the parents is struggling with an addiction or other type of self-destructive cycle, so unprocessed pain, extended family issues, whatever, what can the other parent do to both protect their kids while not tearing down their spouse? Or if this is an extended family member, not tearing down a sibling or someone in your world, and yet getting out of that loop of that codependency, and specifically when you've got kids around?
One of the challenges with codependency is it really blinds us a lot of times from meeting somebody where they're at. And when we look at sharing the gospel with a neighbor that they don't know the Lord, it's not some tragic thing going on in like a health thing or somebody's sick. It's really, you just know they don't know the Lord. And so Acts 2, you just want to, become more Christ-like so they'll see it and ask questions. When we look at that whole process of codependency, maybe it's because we want them to like us or we need them to come to our church, and we could approach it wrong. When we look at Celebrate Recovery model, it's the same way, where when we're looking at somebody in crisis or that's not doing well within our family, whether it's our own kids or extended family members, we want to look at it like, let's meet them where they're at. Let's not come like all defensive. Let's not come with all these weapons, hitting them in the head with the Bible. Although that did work for me. I just wanted to say that. It was a really big Bible, and it really hurt. I was grateful. But you always want to be careful that as soon as we pull people aside, or if we really want to be empathetic, then remember what it was like for somebody to be empathetic with us in a time of need. And this doesn't have to go just so crazy where somebody's getting ready to die because of their choice of drug or something. It really is about disarming people so they can hear the message of the gospel. And Celebrate Recovery, I think, is a great tool for that. It is a safe place, and people can grow with healthy choices and healthy challenges. And when we go through the process, you start to feel, hey, the Spirit's what brings you in, the Spirit's what brings you back. And it's not a bunch of people talking from a high position down. It's people on our platform that teach lessons or give their testimony. They're exactly who are sitting in the seats. As far as attending something, an intervention or something where you're trying to encourage a family member, it's really just being empathetic to what they're going through. And what we'll find is that drugs or alcohol is just a symptom of something deeper, which is why we have the gospel, is because the deeper issue is my identity needs to be in Christ, not my circumstances or my choices.
What would you say to that mom or dad out there who may be listening that they know that they or their spouse, their partner, is really struggling and the kids are getting pulled into this? How do we kind of help people understand that this is not something that needs to be dealt with on down the line, that when children are involved in the home, it's a very immediate and then becomes a very contagious situation for kids?
Yeah, as our kids start to make choices, typically we've told them, depending on age cycles, like some of us have been foolish enough to tell our daughters when they're 16 they can date. Obviously, I learned that's not a really good way to go. We want to encourage our kids to have healthy relationships. So the proactive way is when our oldest daughter eventually was going to have a crush on a boy. We knew it was going to happen. And when she did, we said, that's great. Let's have him over for dinner. Let's get to know him. Who are his parents, instead of like, well, there's no boys. So let's go back to the temptations of especially kids in Christian school. That we believe that they're learning Bible, they're all these great little bubbles, but as choices start to come up there that don't align, we want to understand that our kids can be in a safe place to come to us. So if we're always correcting them and telling them don't do this, don't do that, rules without relationships, what we're going to see is we're not going to get to the service. As soon as we inquire and they say, well, I was at this thing and then they had this and I tried it, you just don't want to stomp all over them. You really want to be empathetic. There's consequences for our actions for sure. But I learned a long time ago, Julie, that when a mom comes to us and their adult kid or their kid in the home that's not an adult yet is making choices, it's not up to me to say, well, you just need to show them tough love. That's not a choice. You can't get between a mom or a dad and their child. That's not how it works. But teaching them how to approach that kid, getting some answers out, and then, being a parent, saying, hey, look, there's probably some different choices we could make here. We're definitely encourage Christian counseling as another viable solution, and bringing in mentor people. And that's kind of what the church was based on anyway.
I think it's good for people to hear that with all the things that Celebrate Recovery offers, it is important to know, too, that there is a time to get a counselor or a therapist involved, that we're creating a community of support through Celebrate Recovery, lots of tools, lots of equipping, but it is also appropriate to then extend that to a licensed therapist counselor who may also be able to help. And I think that's an important distinction. We'll be right back with our conversation with Jeffrey Grassman, who has so many great things to say about Celebrate Recovery and how to get into community and into recovery in a way that is sustaining for you. But first, we want to take just a moment and let you know about someone that we're partnering with. It's been so incredible to see lives and communities changed, and that is through Compassion International.
Hi, I'm McKenna Jane Carr, daughter of Julie Lyles Carr, host of the Modern Motherhood Podcast for AllMomDoes. I'm now in my mid-20s, but when I was 17, I made a decision that I've never regretted. I decided to start sponsoring 2 children through Compassion International and continue to do so today. Through the years, the kids I've sponsored have started growing up and I've been able to be a part of their journeys. It's given so much meaning to me as I've been on my own journey of college and running a nonprofit. It's helped shape my understanding of a larger world and my responsibility to help make that world a better place. And you can have the same experience too. For just over $1 a day, a child you sponsor through Compassion International will receive medical, spiritual, and educational care. Go to compassion.com/allmomdoes. That's compassion.com/allmomdoes.
Do you think that intervention in the ways that we usually think of intervention, do you think it works, or what do you think is a more effective way of engaging someone that you're concerned about? Because we've all seen the reality TV shows now, right? Where you get somebody and you just kind of hijack them and sit them down and talk about all the things that you're seeing in their life that are creating toxic patterns. What are your thoughts? Does it work, or do you think there's a better way?
No, I'm a big fan of intervention myself. So the book of Jeffrey, so to speak, I think that is a viable tool. I know in Celebrate Recovery, we do endorse that as far as it's a viable solution. It's no different than sitting somebody down that has nothing to do with drugs or alcohol, and their behavior or their pathway is going down a really bad path. And a group of believers or friends or family just going, hey, Jimmy, we're really concerned about you. So the overarching kind of template of intervention is definitely something we believe in. It's the challenge for us is most of us aren't professional interventionists, so we're not. We don't just show up and we know what we're doing. I think we have to remember that why we're meeting with the person that's in trouble is to show them love, extend them grace, and just let them know that, hey, if you continue this behavior, this is what my role in your life will be. I always want to tell people in an intervention, when we give them the free gift or offer of, hey, there's something that's, greater than you. His name's Jesus. When we give them that gift, we also want to tell them, we want to be part of your story. This story is so important that we want to be a part of. When somebody that you're doing intervention with doesn't want a part of what you're giving or is not going to quit, see, I don't want to be a part of that story. My story in that would be, I'm going to pray for you. You can reach out to me, those kind of things. So that's what's neat about an intervention, Julie, is you can actually have it without the addict or the person there with everybody involved. You can do it beforehand to make sure what you're saying is actually what you mean. And I think that's really important, that the outcome is not in our control, but how we handle it is. So
I think that's really such a key thing. And I love this idea of the intervention, even if the individual is not there. I think too often we try to gauge what we think is the success of an encounter like that based on, well, did the person get themselves into a therapist? Did they do this, that, or the other? And you're right. We can't really control any part of that. And, maybe some of us have experienced, or maybe it's been our own story, that road through recovery can be very rocky. It can have ups and downs. It can have what are slips back into some of those original behaviors. And as someone on the periphery, someone who's trying to be there as a support, to make sure that we're not too often getting ourselves so engaged that we can't stay in that place of being stable for someone and being that fixed point, rather than getting caught in the vortex and in the whirlwind. Now, how can someone self-assess and know that they themselves might need to get into a community of help? You know, whether it is that mom who discovers that, wow, every day that 5 o'clock glass of wine just has to be had, or someone who finds themselves going again and again to certain places on social media or into a toxic relationship, replicating a dating pattern they continue to see in their lives. Does somebody have to hit rock bottom before they're ready to make these kind of changes? Or are there ways that we can self-assess and say, maybe it's time for me to get into a community of support?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's look at the traditional church model that we live in the United States, which is, first question I would say, are you in your community group or life group of your own church? Are you invested in not just attending, but, I'm going to go down this road of being in a group, community group, Bible study, something where I can bounce some things off people. An example with your analogy of the mom at 5 o'clock having the glass of wine consistently, we always want to ask people there, if you're already asking if that's a problem, or you're encountering, or something inside of you, a spirit is telling you, deep down that, hey, I think something's not right here, then you want to do some basic math. Why don't you try quitting for a year? And if it wasn't a problem, then you're good to go. But what we'll find is that if we can quit for the year, why would we pick it back up if we learned that we just lived without it for a year? So that's kind of that one analogy. I think that when I have behaviors or patterns or destructive things in my life, if I don't put myself around a community of people, then I'm left to my own devices. I'm always going to just defer to it's probably not that bad until the rock bottom hits, which is the pain is greater than the fear. And when the pain is greater than the fear, typically it will change. When we're around other believers, we want to be careful we don't surround ourselves in a group where everybody thinks exactly like us. So it's not a group that meets that has wine at 5 o'clock, and then we're going to ask, hey, do you think this is a bad thing? We want to put ourselves around people that are objective, that care and love us. And the great thing about Celebrate Recovery is you don't have to be at rock bottom to come. All of us have hurts, habits, and hangups. We've all been hurt by something. And that's the challenge is unless we have those answers spontaneous in us, we can go and we can hear a message of hope, or this is where I was, now God has me here. And we look at it as, since it's such a barrier ministry where we're trying to help barriers, get out of the way. The point of Celebrate Recovery is to return us back to health, to where we can lead and serve in our church, in our community. It's not just so we can be better and then we're not doing this behavior and now we're making more money or better relationships with our kids. It's a give back ministry, which means there was somebody there for us when we walked through that door. When the newcomer comes, there was, at RCR, there's like 140 people on a Monday night. There's 140 people there ahead of you. And somehow they're giving back. And so that's how the whole process works. So when it comes to rock bottom, I don't want to wait until I'm terminally ill. What I want to do is I want to go with the leadings. I want to know that people are speaking truth in my life. And we want to have truth with love. And then obviously having a place I can go and check some things out fits the Celebrate Recovery model.
Do you find sometimes people are resistant to coming to Celebrate Recovery, and why? What is the resistance if they're dealing with, something that's getting ahead of them, a hurt, a habit, or a hang up?
I'm not one of those people. That is the biggest thing. And let's put I was at a CR Celebrate Recovery Summit about 7 years ago at Saddleback, and they did what they call a generational testimony. So it was a younger kid that was probably 12. She gave her mini testimony, and then her mom did, who was obviously probably like 29, 30. And then her parents did, which were, in their 60s. And then the other mom did. So 4 generations. So this is how it went. It went with some bad choices, and then there was some chemical, and then it went into the parents. When it got to the older gal, the great grandma, she introduced herself as I'm so-and-so, and I struggle with a critical spirit. And she talked about how growing up in a very legalistic home, very legalistic church, out in the Midwest somewhere, she was so critical of other people that weren't following God's laws that it actually kind of corrupted her own life, as far as she was kind of had a meaner spirit. She wasn't as grace-filled. And when we look at that process, she was my hero, because it's almost easier for me to stand up and say, I'm a believer, I struggle with alcohol, and my name's Jeffrey. Then for somebody that doesn't have any of those things to fall back on for their behavior to say, hi, my name's so-and-so, I'm a believer, and I struggle with judging you. And I think that is so what Celebrate Recovery is about, is it teaches us that it's not up to us to judge or say those people. It's like we're all broken, we're all fallen, we've all fallen short of the ideal. The great scripture that surrounds that. And yet when we go around broken people, we have this facade that's like, yeah, I'm not really there. I'm not a homeless person, or I'm not this. In reality, that's where we're all at. We're all broken inside spiritually, unless we lean upon the one that we know. So
I love that designation, to understand if your first response, if you're struggling with some stuff and your first response is, well, I'm not going to that because I'm not one of those people. Jeffrey just lovingly called you out. So make sure that you heard it. So what can someone expect when they come to a Celebrate Recovery event, function, evening? What, if I'm hesitating, I'm like, I don't know anybody. This is taking some courage on my part. What can I expect when I come through the door?
Yeah, first thing is you have church support. So senior pastor support allows it to happen. Each Celebrate Recovery, there's over 30,000 that meet every week in the United States at churches all over our country. And so when you go, it's actually a part of that local church. So in our Celebrate Recovery, if there's a dynamic that happens, I don't call Saddleback where it all started and ask for questions. It's a church ministry, which means that it's set up by your church. It's there's an authority over it from your local church. It's run by vetted leaders, and it's a safe place. So when you first drive on the campus on a large group night, typically ours starts at 7, so 6 o'clock is dinner. There's plenty of signage. You park your car. People don't accost you. They don't try to get your phone number. You come in and people just say welcome. And nobody tries to say, we don't let people go, why are you here? Who are you? We just say, welcome. Thanks for coming. And the food's over here, and there's a fellowship time. When worship starts at 7, it's in our main sanctuary. We have amazing worship. And so it sets the pace right away. It's a Christ-centered recovery group. And then there's some readings that happen as far as some scripture. And then it's either a live testimony or a teaching. I do a lot of the teachings as the ministry leader, but we have different people that do it. I like to say when I'm up there, I'm kind of the salesperson when I'm doing the teaching, but when we have a testimony, that's a satisfied customer. Mm-hmm. And what happens in Julie, in those testimonies is you'll sit there through the whole 20 minutes, and sometimes it's the last minute and you'll go, that's my story, or I can relate to that, or that's why I'm struggling. And you see, and that's the power of it. And then after that, we have what we call open share groups, where you don't have to share anything, your name, it's completely anonymous. We have guidelines that protect people, and it's there for issue specific and gender. So the biggest promotion I could give Celebrate Recovery at a church is it's gender specific, which means we believe when it comes down to discussing things about what's going on in our lives, that gals need to be with gals, guys need to be with guys. And that's how we form accountability. That's how we form people that are going to help mentor us. We call them sponsors. And that's how we're going to encourage people to continue to walk down some tough roads. And you leave there feeling like it's a family and it's a community. And what's great is it's at your own church, or if you're not attending that church and they have a Celebrate Recovery, you can see that it's done with love, like I said, and grace. And it's completely organized. That's what I love about it. It has the DNA to it. It doesn't get too far off the center line, and I just love the fact that training is such a big part of Celebrate Recovery. And as a state rep in Washington State for Celebrate Recovery, that's what we love to do, is go around and help people strengthen and grow their Celebrate Recoveries. Excellent.
Well, Jeffrey Grassman, thank you so much for taking the time today to let us know about your story, your collision with recovery through Celebrate Recovery, all that you're doing, and how you're helping so many work through their hurts, their habits, and their hangups. Jeffrey, thank you so much.
And thanks again for having us.
Find out more about what Jeffrey's been talking about today at celebraterecovery.com, a fantastic resource for you. And I also want to direct you to the show notes today. You know, our content coordinator, whom I just adore, her name is Rebecca Beckett. And in her extended family, she went through an just incredibly difficult season not all that long ago about someone she loved who was engaged in an addiction cycle. And she has a couple of great posts that you're going to want to check out in the show notes that you can find at AllMomDoes.com. So be sure and check out that today. Hey, if you are in the Seattle, Washington area, when it comes to Celebrate Recovery, we've got a couple of things coming up that you probably want to know about. On August 26th, there's actually a Celebrate Recovery's Run for Your Life, and you can register for that at crrunforyourlife.org. That's crrunforyourlife.org. And then Spirit 1053, there's going to be a fantastic evening of worship with Anna Kelly, and we're going to be celebrating all those who found freedom from life's hurts, habits, and hangups. There's a dinner at 6 p.m. followed by worship, so be sure and check out Spirit 1053 for all the details on that. I would love to connect with you as well at JulieLylesCarr.com and Julie Lyles Carr on all the socials. A big shout out to Donna Toady, our awesome producer, and to Rebecca Beckett, our content coordinator. Coming up next week, she is a beloved Christian fiction author, and you know what? Her real life is even more fascinating than her books, I gotta say. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation with author Katie Ganshert. And that's coming up next week on the Modern Motherhood Podcast.